The main finding of our study was that long-term unemployment, particularly in rural communities, was strongly associated with higher rates of the number of infants having drug withdrawal, mostly from opioids in those communities. What was surprising to us was the magnitude of increase that we saw, particularly in rural communities, of neonatal abstinence syndrome as it related to long-term economic downturns. Just the magnitude when we compare rural communities to urban communities was pretty striking. I hope our study is a wake-up call, both to physicians as well as policymakers, that opioid use is complicated. It's not just about the pill, it's not just about the drug, but it's about the communities. And in many ways, as we think about next steps and as Congress considers legislative action, should consider that infrastructure, investing in communities, may also help benefit the health of communities. In my work as a neonatologist, I take care of infants that have drug withdrawal after birth. When I talk to mothers, their stories are complicated. They don't begin just during pregnancy. It begins years before opioid use in high school or when they're young adults, and oftentimes there's stories of lack of opportunity, unemployment, violence, and trauma. What we wanted to do was dig beyond what most of the literature has done thus far, looking just at the medication and what happens to the infant, to look at what's happening in communities where mothers live and reside. The neonatal abstinence syndrome is a drug withdrawal syndrome that newborns experience shortly after birth, most commonly when they've been exposed to an opioid. I usually describe neonatal abstinence syndrome as a colicky baby times 5. This is an infant who is fussy, irritable, has increased muscle tone. They can have difficulty feeding and difficulty breathing. For infants with severe neonatal abstinence syndrome, they require treatment with a medication like morphine over a period of sometimes weeks. One of the fascinating findings we had in our study was the association with mental health shortage areas, particularly in urban communities, with neonatal abstinence syndrome. We found that shortage areas were associated with higher rates of neonatal abstinence syndrome, and this suggests that people can't get access to treatment. We know that having untreated mental health disorders is associated with higher utilization of opioids. This should also be a call that we need to expand mental health resources and access to mental health resources for women of reproductive age as well as pregnant women. It's more than just drug use that is complicated when we think about the opioid epidemic. We should look back at families, at women, to understand their context. You can't just attack it with decreasing opioids or decreasing. It's more complicated than that. We have to think about what's going on in communities in relation to access to job, access to mental health treatment. I hope we begin to extend the conversation just beyond thinking about opioids themselves as one thing.